you, Judge Brown. Thank you so much, Judge, for agreeing to come on and chat with me this evening. It is an absolute privilege for me to sit down with you. You're such an icon, and I just want to say thank you, since I have watched you from afar since your departure from reality TV, and so much has happened to our country since then. We went from being this nation of free speech and religious freedom to a nation run by this select group of elites who are just thirsty for power. And these people, what I've noticed, they'll do anything to obtain power and to keep it. So you've been very vocal about a number of topics. I've heard you discuss your incredible disdain and disappointment with the political left, particularly the Democrat Party. So for that reason, I am interested in hearing from you your thoughts on the Black community. As you know, the Black community right now, they are by and large very, very invested with the Democrat Party. So I'd like to know, how do you feel about the Black community's relationship with the Democrat Party?
They're programmed. About more than 50 years ago, I was an intern with the DC think tank, and one of my assignments was to research what they called the slave pamphlets. They were pamphlets. I think the earliest one I read was 1706. It was by a William Lynch. And by the way, there really was such a person, but he didn't write a letter. He wrote a bunch of them in a lot of pamphlets, and he was on a circuit up until about 1726, going from Bermuda to the Bahamas to Jamaica to Barbados to the English colonies in North America, other English colonies. And he lectured on how to raise slaves for fun and profit, so to speak. One of the things that was very interesting that was repeated over and over in these slave pamphlets up through the Civil War was that the best way to deal with slavery, to ensure that your slaves were sound and good, obedient slaves, was to subtly interject into the Negro's culture elements of slavery, so they would teach themselves to be slaves and would be responsive to certain signals. In other words, like training a horse. And William Lynch did pioneer that. And what's going on right now is the party that was formed in the second decade of the 1800s to protect, promote, and spread slavery, that, as the commercial you just got through playing was reiterating, fought the Civil War to keep it, then add Jim Crow, Reconstruction, and all the rest of it, segregation. And they simply remembered that they knew how to control Negroes. Like Biden says, he knows the Negro. And he took advantage of the fact that they are evoking the program. A lot of what we do makes us very conducive to being slaves. Like one thing, we never get taught free will. We get taught the exact opposite. And the other thing is, as Christians, you ought to appreciate that there is a new religion that's being spread with the zeal and zealotry that all the rest of the old time religions were spread with. This one has no God, though. It's like Buddhism, where you don't need to have a God, but you can have one. It's a system of philosophy. It's an ancient and honorable religion, so is Confucianism. But this one is what I call the cult of the rainbow. And you have its acolytes and disciples, its new converts, and they're trying to convert the United States of America to this new religion and convert the rest of the world. And everybody who doesn't go along with them, they are heretics, they blaspheme, and they should be burned at the stake in the modern sense.
Right.
And you see no crucifixes in schools and government buildings. You see no six-pointed Jewish stars. You see no crescents for Islam. You do not see six-armed Shiva for the Hinduism. You don't see statues of Buddha, but you see the rainbow all up and down the school corridors. You see them all plastered all over public streets and
Right.
crosswalks. You see the White House bathed in these lights. You see a co-option of Black History Month with Gay Achievement Month in February. You see Gay Pride Month overlapping when they decided to get Juneteenth, which has changed from a red, white, and blue emblem to a fist that is rainbow colored. You see this. And you listen to Walt Disney, and they'd make you think that 50% of the public is gay, which it's not. And we're not really talking about gay folks so much as we're talking about this cult. I mean,
Right.
frankly, to be candid, gay folk, go get your freak on in your bedroom. Now, pastors, I can't find anything in the Old Testament or the New where that is smiled upon.
It's
I
not.
see a lot in there, and I'm not going to insult anybody by trying to quote scripture, but it's in there certainly
It
about the horror of somebody doing what resulted in the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, we do have places of worship, Christian worship, where prancing around in front of the preacher, in front of the pulpit, are the little spastic boys who are not in time with the music, and they like to get patted on their behinds by the choir director, and the choir director is a little suspect, but we won't go there right now. But I'm talking about something else, this
right.
rainbow cult. And by the way, there are a lot of gay folk that don't like it because this rainbow cult embraces pedophilia, which is a really
Right.
horrible thing. It embraces sexualization of children, which is a very bad thing. And it deals with this transsexual thing where you disregard what God sent you here to be, and you escape your responsibilities as a man or escape your responsibilities as a woman, and you can be something else. And the easiest way to define this or illustrate it is, let's say the next time the Titanic goes down,
Mm-hmm.
instead of saying, ma'am, you have my seat on the lifeboat, you and your child, some clown in a dress is trying to throw the woman out of the seat in the lifeboat and take it because he declares he's a woman to escape manly responsibility. Or you
Mm.
get a female trying to play man and escape her responsibility. You see, we're all here to do God's work about continuing into the next generation. And that requires everyone to do their part. Now, these days, with science, technology, thermostats, and microwaves, and cell phones, and electronic devices, and computers, we kind of forget the basics. But that's what's out there. They're trying to create a new religion. Now,
Mm.
the fact of the matter is in the United States, from the last census that was taken, about little less than 1/2% are trans, little less than 1% are lesbian, and a little less than 1.5% are homosexual males. There's a little bit more when you throw in the 3 to 4% that have swung both ways, but that's a very small percentage of the American public. But they're trying to use propaganda tactics to make the public think
Think
it's
it's
wider spread than it is. They're using the media to spread the lie that this is supposed to be a normal thing. It's not. In the medical and psychiatric and psychological professions are very much against it, but they don't get heard. Now, what we have is the Democratic Party was selected about 50 years ago by the antecedents to this cult. And what they decided was that since the Democratic Party was trying to seduce black people back when by pushing so called civil rights because it became rather functional, and it also, believe it or not, liberated the Southern white that had been the subject of the Democratic Party's attentions for so long.
okay.
So it got associated with civil rights and protection of the Bill of Rights. due process of law and such things. The Republican Party got caught somewhere in the early part of the 20th century and the late part of the 19th with big business and high finance. He kind of
Right.
neglected the ordinary person. Actually, in 1851, when it was incorporated, it was chartered for the purpose of abolition to end slavery and its spread. But somewhere along the lines, they kind of lost their soul. But they are finding it again. And now, instead of being the party that sort of steps on the Bill of Rights because it got in the way of law and order, they're beginning to discover that the rainbow cult is stomping on the Bill of Rights because it gets in the way of them spreading their new cult. And they are beginning to appreciate it. You see lawfare these days, which is getting absolutely ridiculous, and you see a more frightening thing with how much the mainstream media has gotten on board with this program and functions as the main propaganda engine for the whole thing. There is a
Right.
fundamental property of propaganda, which is tell a lie long enough and loud enough, and you can get anyone, including the liar, to believe it. And we've had
Right.
a lot of that. So,
So,
one
Judge, I
little brief more
appreciate.
thing, and then
Oh, go ahead.
go ahead. One little
Now,
last thing. They took this over back in they started this movement in the late 60s. There was a cabal of females that hated that they weren't males, feminists. There was a bunch that hated men because they were lesbians. There were some boys who hated strong men because they were
they
weak.
were.
And there was some homosexual men that hated that they weren't normal men. And there were a lot of people back in the 60s, since the Nam was going on, that hated that it was a man thing that caused war, they said. Love, make love, not war. So you got this development of unisex child rearing, no war toys, no cap pistols, no water guns. Um, Boys can play with dolls. You got the rise of Ken to accompany Barbie, and those were
Barbie.
formed off on the boys. And then you got G.I. Joes, which nominally came across as toy soldiers, but were used for something else to acclimate the young males to the idea of playing with dolls like the girls rather than just toy soldiers type stuff. Because remember, war is evil. No cap pistols, no water pistols, none of that. So it was an entirely different type of thing than playing soldier. Now, we also got black exploitation, where Hollywood was saving itself, its movie industry, from going broke by using this newly appreciated market. And instead of doing something that was uplifting, they decided to go to the lowest
Exploit.
common denominator and glorify dysfunction.
Pimps and hoes.
Pimps, hoes, drugs dealers, and gangsters, and thieves, and murderers, and burglars, and con artists.
Right.
They became what was idolized, and rap music digressed from talking about love, working hard, frustrations with life, and how to face it, into glorifying the dysfunction as well. And we get here today where, after 50 years, we have had a concerted campaign to emasculate the country and destroy the traditional nuclear family, starting with black folk first, since black men were looked at as exemplars of physical masculinity. So you take them down and you use the selfishness of some who are in the entertainment industry who make money. Tyler Perry, some of the rap artists who exploited the same kind of thing, and you got the emasculation game going, and young white guys like to emulate black guys because they think black youth are hyper masculine, and you get the rap video, gangster hip hop rap video. It's supposed to have men in charge of a bunch of sexy women, but the truth of the matter is what's bouncing around half naked is not a sexual fantasy. It's the rap artist grandmama, his aunts, his mama, and their friend girls who would be hanging on the back stoop in the projects half naked during the summer, drinking a 40 ounce and smoking a joint, trying to get laid, get knocked up, and get another or bigger check. So it's a poisonous situation, and people are exploiting this right now. And the Democratic Party has become part of this whole thing. In fact, I would suggest that you look up the Black Caucus, Congressional Black Caucus, and you look at their official publication and the pictures of their membership. Try to get one about a year old because they've been taking down the white people that are members of the Black Caucus. And they're also trying to disassociate themselves with the Liberty Caucus, which is also known as the LGBTQIA plus Congressional Caucus. And you will find that just about every single member of the Black Caucus is a member of that one. And if you go back, and you can, and if you can get requested reports from the congressional record that keeps track of such things, look at the voting records of the Black Caucus, and you'll find that in the last 35 years or so, they've introduced absolutely nothing that is for the good of black people, but mostly all for the good of the LGBTQIA plus crowd that they're also members of the caucus for. So that's where we are right now.
Judge, that was a masterpiece of a quick history lesson to connect where we are today and to look back to see how all of this started. I talk a lot on my channel about masculine exceptionalism, and I am so challenged with just trying to understand, how did we get here? Obviously, as a Christian podcaster, I talk about the spiritual component of it. However, there is a specific historical context that needs to be explored. And I think you did a masterful job of laying that out for us. So it sounds like, in summary, what you're saying is that the Democratic Party as we know it, I'd like to quote a good friend of mine who Vince Everett Ellison calls them a cabal of psychopaths and perverts and liars and anti-Christian bigots. And it seems as if you would echo in that same sentiment. So the question is, masculine exceptionalism is such a lost art, and we don't see a lot of it today. And I would consider you one of, like I said, the lone bastion of men who are willing to just speak forth what is true, to demystify all of the lies that we're hearing out in the marketplace, and to teach your people this is how we got here. Since you brought up this new religion of the LGBTQIA, the rainbow.
The rainbow cult.
Okay, the rainbow cult. This is my first time hearing that the Congressional Black Caucus is also members of, you called it the Liberty Caucus, and is that the caucus
Yes,
of
for the
individuals who are pushing?
LGBTQIA.
Wow.
That is the name for the LGBTQIA caucus. You'll also find some other interesting things. There are a lot of white members of the Black Caucus as well. As a matter of fact, one of the most interesting things is it touches on a black subject, reparations. The Black Caucus has a reparations committee. Until I started jumping them about it a few months ago, they published it, had the pictures up, and it was interesting who the chairman of the Black Caucus's Reparations Committee was.
Please enlighten us. Who is that?
That individual happens to be the congressman for the 9th Congressional District here in Tennessee, which is Memphis, Tennessee. He's gay, he's white, and he's Jewish. So the chairman of the Black Caucus's Reparations Committee is gay, white, and Jewish. And he was also chairman of the Liberty Caucus's Reparations Committee. They have one too. Now, about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, you saw this big brouhaha where the Democrats in the black caucus and the Democrats had 2 weeks worth of a clown show where they had hearings on whether or not to have a study of reparations. They never
Right. What
have
was all of that
introduced any
about?
legislation. That was a clown show because they were preparing it for their real aim, which was 2 weeks later, pass on the first vote count, on voice
Mm-hmm.
vote, without debate, was guess what? An act style quote, the Gay Reparations Act, unquote. And it wasn't anything but chump change initially, but it's open ended. It started with $58 million, and what the subject was supposed to be is recompense, reparations to gay couples that had been denied insurance benefits because they were supposed to be discriminated against. So every single person that is, I think maybe there were two or three that weren't part of this, that's a member of the Black Caucus, co sponsored the gay reparations bill, which is still wide open for further funding. So, what time is this when we start looking at it? It is inappropriate and it is a sellout. Look at another thing they're claiming credit for, the Emmett Till anti lynch bill. Well, first off, besides the subject matter denoting something that's useless because it is
Known for
murder, and we
lynching.
do have enough statutes on everybody's book to deal with the various and sundry degrees of murder and other types of homicide.
Right.
And the fact that, according to the Tuskegee Institute, that's been studying these things for 100 years, there hasn't been a real lynching since 1964.
Right. So
And
why the heck would they
also,
introduce some sort of legislation like
well,
that?
I'm
Why
gonna
would we
I'm
need
gonna
that?
tell you, because it has nothing to do with a lynching. Now, a lynching is a mob going after somebody and killing them, right?
Yes.
It's usually, in our mind's eye, Klan mob going after somebody black and lynching them. But don't forget those 1940 movies, the black and white ones, where the sheriff says, "Boys, ain't nobody gonna break into my jail and hang this man. He gonna get
Right.
a fair trial before we hang him." Go through due process. So a lot of white folk got lynched, especially on the frontier. But
Mm-hmm.
the Emmett Till anti-lynch bill does not require a mob. One. Two, it doesn't require killing.
So how is it a
Three, it
lynching
can be
bill?
a yeah, three, it can be a kidnapping, and four, it can be a beating. In other words, it is set up because of something unique. It's the first time in American federal criminal law where they interject sexual orientation as a specific category of victim. Now, what you have in a crime, in other words, let's say a guy broke up with his girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
He goes out with his homeboys and they go to a club and he's dancing. He's getting a little full of it because he's feeling down and he's dealing with a PYT, pretty young thing in a tight skirt, hoop earrings, long braids, and all of this. And they're exchanging spit somewhere in the shadows. And he looks down and Miss Thing has got an erection. He goes, "Whoa, what in the world are you?"
Oh.
And
Right.
he busted in the jaw and maybe he splits the lip. That's now federal lynching.
What? Judge. Wait a minute. Let me reiterate this for the audience. What Judge Joe Brown is saying, they're at a club and the gentleman who thinks he's dancing with a female discovers that this female is a biological male, and the knee-jerk reactional response from the male is to off her in the face because it's like, whoa,
Bam.
what is this? Right.
That's federal
So
lynching.
that is considered federal lynching where there's no rope involved, there's no murder, and there's no mob. So this new
Yeah.
definition of quote unquote hate crime has been established Using the name of Emmett Till.
Yeah,
Wow.
and I've talked to Dr. Clenora Hudson Weems quite a bit. In fact, we chat once or twice a week. She's a friend of mine. I've known her for 30 years. Emmett
Right.
Till's mother introduced me to Dr. Weems about 30 some years ago, and I used to talk to Emmett Till's mother. And they would be highly insulted with this bill, with the way it is. So it's absolutely astonishing how we got bamboozled, where they are going back to the black communities or any other community where they happen to be elected, and they're telling the black folk, we did something for you. We got a federal lynching bill to protect black folk, like it's needed. The night riding statutes that are dating from the 1870s. I mean, for
Right.
goodness sakes, what do you want? So we did all this for you, but nobody reads it. Or it's like Obamacare. You give Obama a lot of care for the medical stuff. Obama did not draft it. He had absolutely nothing to do with it until his trust fund out of Indonesia invested heavily in Blue Cross. The grandson of one of the Blue Cross founders, a Dr. Bill Frist of Nashville, Tennessee, who was Republican Senate Majority Leader, drafted what is known as Obamacare in 2003. He couldn't get it passed. But when Obama's trust fund invested heavily in Bill Frist family business, which is Blue Cross, then Obama got interested in it. It was an Indonesian trust fund, so American law couldn't touch it. And Obama supported it, and it was adopted in 2010. And Bill Frist promptly resigned because now his family is guaranteed to be billionaires for the next few generations.
Right.
And it does need to be changed. But see, we stupidly go along. Black man came up with this evil white Trump and evil white folk. They trying to destroy it. No, if you get into it, it's horrible. Let me talk about
Right.
that. You got told two lies straight up by Kamala Harris Imhoff, and I'm gonna come back to that in a second.
Let's go there, Judge.
She said insulin was capped out at $38 a month. That's a lie because I'm a type 2 diabetic and I know what I have to spend for it, and I'm 77 years old. She said a senior's medical bills, his costs will top out at $2,000. That's an even worse lie. Last year, I had Blue Cross, it was through SAG after, and I paid $1,670 a year for it, and I had about 2,500 max on copays. Do you
Mm-hmm.
know what my Medicare expense is? It's
What is it?
$14,700 a year for Medicare. And so far this year, I've spent almost $8,000 in copay on medication. So somebody's lying to the public. Now, why do we say Kamala Harris? And by the way, Kamala is the name of a pagan goddess for the Hindu faith, all right? It's their business, but it is the name of a goddess.
Right.
Now, why is it Harris instead of Mrs. Imhoff? It's Mrs. Clinton, Mrs. Palin, Sarah Palin, Mrs. Nancy Pelosi. It was Mrs. Gloria Feinstein. We have, why is it that we have no
If your signal
mention?
recovers.
Okay, do you have me?
I do. You were talking about why is she Mrs.
Why is
Harris and not
she
Imhoff?
Miss Harris is Imhoff? Is it to keep us from knowing she's married to somebody Jewish, adopted his two Jewish children when they were teenagers, not infants? Is it to keep us from knowing she joined the Hillcrest Jewish Country Club in Los Angeles? It's got a horrible relationship with black folk. What's going on here? See, that kind of thing is absolutely horrible, and we need to know about it. Nothing wrong with Jewish people, but what's the game plan here? See, we've got
Right.
enough of it. So I'm going to leave that with you guys to discuss, and I've got to go on and do my own show. So I'm going to duck out and go there. All right?
Awesome. Well, I am just grateful that you came by and dropped us a little knowledge, and I will be discussing the rest of this with my audience. Judge Joe Brown, thank you so much for stopping by today. Hope you have a wonderful show, and you are always welcome here on the Standard Truth Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Standard of Truth Podcast. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to check out the Standard Home and Living Lifestyle Store at standardhomeandliving.com. We've got everything from book studies, journals, and even podcast merch, so you can take a piece of this conversation with you wherever you go. And of course, be sure to follow me on Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok for more updates, behind the scenes, and daily insights. You can also stay connected at thestandardofTruthPodcast.com, where you'll find all the latest news and events, including live events coming to a town near you. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. Until next time, keep standing firm in the truth. Grace and peace.